Hello, my name is Ivan-Aleksandar Mavrov, and I'm going to talk about a joint work with Kamesh Munagala and Yiheng Shen from Duke University. First, let me introduce the model of the multi-winner election. Multi-winner election is a resource allocation problem of indivisible public goods. Examples include the standard parliament election or instances of participatory budgeting elections where the projects require the same unit size budget. Now we formally define the model. We have the utility profiles of a set V of n voters, a set C of unit size candidates, and some budget K. Each voter has her utility profile denoted by a set function UI of S. We represent the imposed constraints on the outcome by the set P of allowable committees. Our goal then is to select a fair committee W that lies in the set of allowable committees P and in the same time satisfies the budget by having a size of at most K candidate. The main motivation behind our paper is the question of whether a decision maker can guarantee fair representation of rights when the final outcome is subject to imposed exogenous constraints. A classical approach in practice that attempts to limit skewed representation is the partitioning of the budget and the candidates into disjoint geographical areas, and setting a maximum number of candidates to be selected from each region. Previous research directions have modeled this type of a constraint by using partitioning matrices. A second type of constraints comes in the form of conflicts or incompatibility between candidates. For example, in the scenario of participatory budgeting, where a social planner wants to build multiple sport facilities across a metro area, the decision maker may denote as conflictory two adjacent projects that are in the same neighborhood, so that by doing so, the decision maker can prevent this neighborhood of utilizing too much of the common budget at the expense of other neighborhoods that may end up with no projects at all. The third type of constraint is the packing constraint. Candidates may be assigned to maybe overlapping categories such as gender, race, socioeconomic status, and we may have upper bound constraints on the number of candidates that we can select from each category. Similarly, the Rooney Rule constraints are lower bound quotas that the decision maker sets as a form of affirmative action for each category of candidates, with the objective of providing each category of candidates with a baseline representation. The main goal we pursue in our work is achieving proportional representation. That is, we would want to arrive at an outcome which, roughly speaking, provides protected groups with power that is proportional to the size of their group. Two of the fairness notions of that encompass this fairness desiderata are the core and the extended justified representation, EJR. For the rest of this presentation, I will focus mostly on the core, but in our paper, we show how our ideas can extend to EJR. The core is a broad framework that has its origins in economics and cooperative game theory. And in particular, the core is the set of possible outcomes that no group of voters opposes and blocks. For committee W, that has been selected by the decision maker based on all the votes in V, we define the blocking coalition to be a subset S of the voters for which two conditions hold. First, there must exist a subset of candidates that S can afford with their fair proportional share of the budget. That is, the share of the budget that the size of T occupies must not exceed the proportional share of the voters in the coalition S. The second condition is that the committee T must provide each of the members of the coalition with strictly higher utility. The existence of the exact core in this form remains an open question, even for the simplest types of utility functions. However, many research directions, including our paper, have had success in achieving multiplicative approximations to the core, where we require a blocking coalition to be able to achieve gamma times higher utility than W provides it with. We will now demonstrate with an example why the standard notion of the core may fail to provide meaningful fairness guarantees when there are constraints on the outcome. Suppose that the voters in the metro area live in P neighborhoods of suburbs with equal size, and suppose we have a budget of K that is equal to P squared. A voter receives utility of 1 for each project that is built in their suburb. In the following diagram, the neighborhoods are represented by blue rectangles, and the circles are potential projects. Projects are colored in red if they are selected. The constraint that we consider in this instance is that there must be at least K minus P projects that would serve the downtown area of the city, which has been run down in previous years. That implies that there can be at most P projects built in the suburbs. Symmetry implies that each suburb should build 1 project. This common sense outcome, however, results in a utility of 1 for each voter. However, any neighborhood would have a fair share of P, and thus they could obtain a utility of P if they were to form a coalition, while still satisfying the constraint to leave K minus P for to the downtown projects. By letting K grow, we can conclude that there can be no multiplicative approximation to the core when we have even a single constraint. The issue illustrated with the previous example is that when a group of voters forms a coalition, they are free to use their fair share of the budget without considering how this can impact the rest of the voters. In order to address this problem, we introduce a modified version of the core that we call the restraint core. The restraint core plays out as a framework in 2 stages. In the first stage, when a set of voters S declares that they want to deviate, the decision maker selects a subset W hat of this committee W with size at most the fair share of the voters V minus S. W hat is meant to secure the fair representation of the voters that do not deviate. In the second stage, the deviating voters in S must complete the committee by filling up W hat with candidates up to their fair share of the budget. Note that S must make sure that the final committee must be allowable. The definition of the restraint core is a generalization of the standard core. This is because when there is no constraint, the worst W hat selection for the deviating voters must be the empty set. Then the restraint core definition will coincide with the standard core. In the next part of the presentation, I will go over some of the technical steps that lead up to our main result on providing an approximation to the core for XOS and beta self-bounding functions. Previous research directions on the topic of the core have focused on approval profiles. Approval profiles are additive discrete utilities in 0, 1, so that each voter either approves a project or disapproves of it. The utility of a voter is the number of selected projects that she approves. For this type of a utility function, the PAV scoring rule has been shown to yield strong approximation to the core. The PAV rule maximizes the harmonic numbers of the utilities of the voters. That is, each voter's contribution to the total score is the sum of the reciprocal numbers 1, 1/2, 1/3, up to 1 over UI of W. Our first technical contribution is a simple extension of the PAV rule to the instance of continuous additive utilities. Namely, we modify the contribution of each voter to the PAV score. For a voter I, we set their PAV contribution to be the area below the harmonic step function up to UI of W. Thus, For fractional utilities, we also add the area that is proportionally covered of the next step, which corresponds to the ceiling of the utility UI for voter I. We were able to show the committee we were able to show that the committee which locally maximizes the general PAV score yields a multiplicative approximation to the restraint core for additive utilities and matrix constraints. We next turn to more sophisticated utility profiles beyond additive utilities. Indeed, in our paper, we were able to extend the two approximate core results from the approval setting to the setting of submodular utilities. Submodular utilities are often considered to be the discrete version of concave utilities, which capture from economics the notion of decreasing marginal utilities and decreasing returns. XOS utilities have been introduced to model the cases when in voting we take into consideration not only our own utility, but that of a family member. XOS utilities can be defined as taking the maximum value across multiple additive utility profiles. Or in other words, if one of my family members is happy, I'm happy too. An example for this could be parents that rate their hire their projects that yield the highest utilities for their children's education or for making their commute to work the shortest. Beta self-bounding utilities are functions that generalize both submodular and XOS utilities. While submodular utilities maintain that adding one more candidate to a committee yields smaller marginal effects, beta self-bounding utilities allow for complementarity effects. Beta is a constant that limits how strong the effect of complementarity can be. Essentially, on the left side, we have the sum of the marginal effects of every candidate in W, and on the right side, we have beta times the total utility from W. Our main technical result lies in analyzing the instance of beta self-bounding utilities. Previous work has been able to show that PAV achieves a constant approximation to the core by considering a swapping algorithm. That is, the algorithm initializes the committee and then it swaps one candidate in W for another outside of W, whenever the latter candidate has a higher marginal effect. In the case of additive utilities, this is equivalent to searching for a local maximum of the PAV score. To make the algorithm run in polynomial time, one can consider a threshold for the improvement in the PAV score needed to for making a swap. In our paper, we consider the outcomes that globally maximize the smooth Nash welfare function. In particular, we show that the committee achieving the global maximum of such a function lies in the e to the power of beta approximate restraint core for arbitrary general constraints on the allocation. In this presentation, I will only give some of the intuition for why moving from the additive case to the more sophisticated case of beta self-bounding functions would require us to sacrifice the local approach and proceed with the global maximum. Additive utilities imply that the marginal effect of a candidate does not depend on which other candidates have also been selected. With additive utilities, when one candidate has a higher marginal effect than another, we know that by adding the first and removing the second, we would obtain strictly a higher total score. With beta self-bounding, unlike in the additive case, this is not for certain because marginal effects fail to capture the additional utility coming from the complementarity between candidates. However, we can safely remove candidates one by one. For that case of XOS, for example, when we have K candidates, we can show that there must be a candidate that has a marginal effect of at most 1 over K of the total score. By continuing to iteratively remove candidates, we are able to bound the decrease of the total score, which helps us to show that the existence of a blocking coalition results in a contradiction with the optimality of the initially chosen committee. that maximizes the global Nash welfare function. Next, I'll cover some of the lower bounds that we obtain for the approximation of the core. As I previously mentioned, the existence of the exact core remains an open question. However, in our paper, we show that no C approximation to the restraint core may exist for a constant C smaller than 16/15, even when we have approval utilities and a single constraint. The construction we provide is the following. We have 4 voters and 6 types of candidates, so that each candidate is approved by exactly 2 of the voters, and each voter approves exactly 3 candidates. We set a budget of 6.4 R and a packing constraint of 6 R over all the candidates. Intuitively, the reason why no outcome can lie in the exact core is because there is a gap of 0.4 R between the actual number of candidates that can be selected and the stated budget constraint. This provides a subset of voters more power to deviate than their fair share within the allocation constraint of 6R. And the construction of the six groups enables us to have deviators to split the extra utilities among themselves in a flexible way. Even though this instance may seem a bit unusual at first glance, it often arises in practice. For example, in participatory budgeting, based on the votes of a decision maker might want to create a new power plant that would open more jobs. Suppose they could afford the budget for that project, but ESG quotas set to preserve the local environment may not allow for such a project to be selected if it exceeds the quotas. We were able to show that the approximation constant must be exponential in beta. Our technical contribution is an approach, our final technical contribution is an approach that considers the size of a protected group and is able to achieve tighter fairness guarantees by doing so. Previous research on the core showed that PAV, as well as a wider class of algorithms, cannot achieve better than 2 approximation to the core. What we were able to show in our paper is that as the coalition size increases, the approximation factor needed for us decreases. The intuitive distinction between our result and that in previous papers is the following. Previous constructions suggest how, for infinitely small coalitions, one can concentrate all their utility from W in a small number of candidates, which leaves their fair share of the budget almost untouched. However, what we show is that for bigger coalitions, such a concentration of utility leads to candidates with small marginal effect. Thanks to the swapping nature of the local PAV algorithm, this ultimately implies that the candidates that have not been selected should have lower effects in return. Finally, the open questions and research directions that our paper identifies are the following. The immediate question in connection with our main technical result on beta self-bounding functions is whether the restraint core can prove applicable in the instance of subadditive utilities. Finally, it would be worth studying whether the notion of the restraint core can be extended to the more general frameworks, such as the social application of the domain of the participatory budgeting problem with constraints, the instance of extended justified representation with constraints, and the case of private goods allocation. Thank you for your attention and for watching.